Hi, welcome to Issues That Matter. My guest today is Pippa. Pippa, pronounce your last name?
Bartolotti.
And Pippa and I are going to discuss the genocide that's going on in Gaza right now. So, on October 7th, when we woke up and we saw the news or we read the newspaper and we saw this horrendous event taking place, and it's still taking place. But when this initially happened on the 7th of October, were you shocked?
No, I wasn't. In fact, I made a comment at the time, which was what took them so long. You see, Cynthia, I've actually been to Gaza and I know what it's like there. And I was there on a good day when there wasn't enough water and there wasn't enough fuel and the bakeries had run out of bread. Um, that was a good day. It was a good day when I looked out to sea and saw the little Gazan fishing boats being pushed into the shore by the Israeli warships. It was a good day when I was taken out to the border with Israel, which was, land that needed to be farmed, and heard the stories of the young boys, even the donkeys who'd been shot whilst trying to plough the soil. Um, when I read up about it afterwards, when I discovered that 16 young boys had been shot in the left thigh over a 6-month period, all these things, I could tell you some stories. I was there when the drones were overhead and you don't know when they're going to shoot and when they're not. And I watched the young men walk, creep with their backs to the wall under the trees so that the drones wouldn't spot them. Um, Gaza is a horrible place. I mean, Gaza City was half bombed when I was there in 2010. So I can't imagine there's very much left now. It's a hellhole. It's a hellhole. The Catholic Church calls it a concentration camp, and I have to agree with that.
Hmm. So, can you describe what uh, a everyday Palestinian goes through, just to survive? What's it like?
Well, before all this, there was overcrowding, and not everybody lived in a house. Some people still had to live in tents because of previous incursions by the Israeli occupation force. The amount of water that they are given, and it's all aid. I mean, the Gaza, to explain to people who've never been and perhaps aren't fully aware, is a strip of sand by the Mediterranean Sea. It has no rivers. It has no fresh water, although it does have an underground aquifer. But over the years, that has been so depleted. And in an underground aquifer is water which is millions of years old, and it doesn't refresh by rain or anything else. And it's been so depleted, they're really scraping the bottom, and it's quite polluted now. Um, it has the potential to be lovely because of the lovely long sandy beaches and the warm Mediterranean Sea. But every day, uh, when I went, the sewage facilities had just been bombed. And so raw sewage was coming out. You imagine 2 million people, raw sewage into the Mediterranean Sea, and people on holiday in Cyprus and the Greek islands are swimming in this. And the smell, Cynthia, is unbelievable. So every day, they are handed out small bottles of water, a piece of bread each, and whatever they can manage. They don't have enough water to grow crops effectively because they need to drink. and they need to wash their children and themselves. So small amount of water has to go a long way. And there's very little left over. I mean, you and I can grow a tomato plant, in the on the windowsill if we want to.
Right.
That's actually that's actually really hard in Palestine, where resources are so low that there are no croplands, there are no fields or kitchen gardens. It's literally scraping a living together as best you can. And that's one of the primary reasons for tunnels, is to get food and sustenance in. The small amount of aid that comes from, by the way, the EU, mostly, which is paid for by EU citizens. So, on the one hand, they're perpetuating a war. On the other hand, they're giving them the means to just stay alive another day longer. I don't know how cruel that is. It seems to me that there is no magnificence in prolonging the agony when you're not prepared to do anything about it. But anyway, yeah. So every day in Gaza is hard, and how they keep clean, I do not know. But I went to a girls' school, and the girls look so beautiful in their white headscarves. There was they have paper and pens to speak of, but they do learn, and they are so polite and so sweet. I was, my heart has kind of stayed in Gaza. It has stayed with the orphans when I went to see an orphanage. We took a few toys and things, but the empty eyes of those children who've been in previous bombing campaigns and who have lost their families, they have that look of wide-eyed, un uncomprehending look of is if this is the world, I'll never understand it look. And there was so much love being put on them by the women who looked after them all, and yet there is no mending that kind of trauma, or no permanent mending, maybe a little bit, but and I've seen it now on the news clips that we see here, the little children shaking, um, and their eyes have got that same look. Like, what's going on? Is this what I'm born to? It's horrid, absolutely horrid. So yes, Gaza. I mean, David Cameron, an ex-British MP, referred to it as the biggest open-air prison in the world. But the Catholic Church has gone farther, because no one can get out. They can't get the medical treatment they need. They can't escape. They're being bombed on. I mean, it is a concentration camp. Of course it is. There's no other word. And I don't know what the average Israeli thinks about that. I really don't.
Mm. About how many people do you think is affected by this war? Millions?
Um, oh,
Thousands?
millions, millions. Well, I don't know. Let's say the population of Gaza, which is much depleted most recently, there's about 2.5, or there were about 2.5 million in Gaza City. And Khan Yunis, which is the next biggest city, had slightly less. So we're talking about 4 or 5 million people, um, every one of whom is affected, because even if they haven't had their house bombed away outright, um, anyone who's left with a house will be moving over to share it with other families. And even then, they're not safe. So you sometimes have, as I have heard, 10 or 12 families sharing one apartment. It's that bad.
Oh my goodness.
Oh, yes, it's that bad.
Wow. So, how far back do you know about Hamas?
Well, I met the leaders of Hamas, um, whilst I was there, and actually the deputy leader at the time, had been educated at Manchester University. His English was absolutely thick. Um, The leadership were, I was in a convoy of some, at the end of it, probably about 300 odd people. And although the girls and boys were on separate tables at this occasion, they were very keen to talk to the women, because we were actually, quite keen to find out more about the kind of questions you're asking, what it's like there, what's the housing like, how are they rebuilding when they can't have any building repair materials, how do they manage? There were many, many questions. I found them very polite, very charming. I met their wives and some of their children, and they lived more or less underground, because it's 100% of the time there's a threat. Your whole life spent under a threat. And I must say that they were charming. But you've got to remember, the Hamas is actually the political and social wing of Hamas, of this particular organization. They were elected, just like any political party can be elected.
Okay.
Um, uh, the social aspects of what they do, I think I can just define in one short story. I stayed in Syria because negotiating to get into Gaza was really difficult. It took us 3 weeks to complete negotiations. But I stayed and made friends, or they made friends with me, a charming Palestinian family who lived in the Palestinian refugee camp in Latakia in the south of Syria. And one day I was just out shopping for bananas or something, and I bumped into the father of this family, who was a sweet, sweet man. And I knew they were Hamas supporters anyway, because they were, they felt that the only thing that stuck up for the refugees and the Palestinians was in fact Hamas, and he had a point. But he took me round a couple of streets to this, and he showed me this clean little shop with ever such neat little glass shelves and all the rest of it. And there was a woman in there, and he said, this woman was born with spinal bifida. She had almost no chance of finding a husband to help keep her. And she would need to look after her parents as they got older. So Hamas bought this little shop for her and fitted it out nicely. And then she has an independent income. And this is the social aspect of what the organization like Hamas does. Now, everybody's being told that they're fighters. I mean, none of the Hamas people I met were capable of being a fighter. I mean, they were just not that kind. But the affiliation is with the Al Qassam Brigade, and they are the fighting part of Hamas. So Hamas is political, and Al Qassam is military. A little bit like, if you look at Irish history, we had Sinn Féin as the political side and the IRA as the military side. And it's a little bit like that. That's the nearest I can come to.
Okay. Um, I don't think that people in this country, because of the news media, are aware of the particular circumstances that Palestinians have to live under, right?
They've got no idea, or they are suppressing the things that we need to know. Um, I tend to think it's the latter. The news media, especially the mainstream news media, is mainly run by politics these days, and whoever's in power tends to run the headlines. The things creep out now and again, but not very often. But just to give you a little bit of historical background, and this morning I actually printed it out, something called the Balfour Declaration, which was made in 1917, when Britain had the mandate for Palestine. In other words, Great Britain ruled Palestine in 1917. And it's not very long. Dear Lord Rothschild, it starts. I have much pleasure in conveying to you, on behalf of His Majesty's government, the declaration of sympathy with Jewish Zionist aspirations, which has been submitted to and approved by the Cabinet. His Majesty's government view with favour the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavours to facilitate the achievement of this object. It being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine. So that last bit was saying, in other words, we give this piece of land to the Jews to settle in, but they should do nothing to prejudice the civil or religious rights of the existing population. So whilst I don't think the British had any right to give Palestine away to anyone else, they did actually put that clause in, but it was soon forgotten. So that was 1917. By 1936, I think it was, we had Ben-Gurion, David Ben-Gurion, often looked upon as the founder of Israel or whatever. We will expel the Arabs and take their place. Right, so between 1917 and actually that was 1939, we had this massive change. And we even had people like Moshe Dayan, which in yours and my lifetime, we would recognize that name and that Prime Minister of Israel saying, Israel must invent dangers to do this, and it must adopt the strategy of, oh dear, can't read my writing now, provocation and revenge. So adopt the strategy of provocation and revenge. And that is just this week become evident. Remember the 40 beheaded babies we were told about?
Mm.
There were not 40 beheaded babies. There were not even 40 dead babies. There was one dead baby, and that baby was not beheaded. So using lies, because I'm not going to be polite and call it propaganda or anything, let's just say lies, using lies, they stir up this feeling for revenge. They provoke people into demanding revenge. And then once that revenge has been exacted, they can come back and say, oh, it wasn't that at all, mistake. But, 10,000 people have been killed. So I'm almost speechless.
As far back as I can remember, and I'm sure I would say you and I are basically in the same age group. I I know that there was friction between Israel and Palestine. When's this gonna end?
Well, here's the thing. Who is perpetuating it? The United States government by providing funding and political cover and support for what Israel is doing. Joe Biden could end what's happening in Palestine today by picking up the phone to Netanyahu and saying, okay, stop it. He could have done it on October the 8th. He could have done it at any time. He does not. So that this particular thing could have been stopped. But until there is an end to the apartheid regime, until Israel renounces the fact that this is a Jewish state and only for Jews, until the Arabs, the Palestinian Arabs in Israel, never mind Palestine, never mind the occupied territories, have equality, the right to vote, the same amount of water to drink even. I mean, on every level, we're talking about equality and political possibilities to start making change. Until Netanyahu's government is completely taken out of office, because it is a wicked, wicked government bent on destruction and death of Palestinians. He has to be removed, and his whole government, the right wingers, the Zionists, have to be removed. And they are not interested in talking about peace. And until the world starts discovering other ways of dealing with conflicts, like, I mean, warfare is not the best way to deal with conflict.
Right.
There are so many other ways, but the world kind of has to grow up. Cynthia, today, Joe and I went down to the remembrance ceremony for Armistice Day, which is really just almost where we live. And they talked all sorts of things about peace and reconciliation and blah 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 blah. It was complete hypocrisy. The British government has never condemned the slaughter that's taking place in Palestine now, or indeed ever. No government is in the collective West is prepared to stand up and say, okay, that's enough. Let's deal with this. Let's give the Palestinians a chance to run their own lives. Let us give them a step-by-step way of dealing with both the violence that's been meted upon them and the possibility of a future that looks to be viable for their children, where they can have equal progress with Israeli children, and so on. Until we all start growing up and stop sort of saying boys will be boys, or whatever the whatever it is, we have to grow up. We have to mature as a civilization. We're still in the Stone Age. In fact, in the Stone Age, they probably weren't so violent. So I think that when you see that the millions of children who have been brought up in concentration camp, and all they're going to think of is revenge when their entire families have been killed. When you see the generations of education that the Israelis have had, teaching them to be vengeful, teaching them to act in such a way that they consider Palestinians less than animals, less than themselves. We have to undo generations of work here and start doing something similar to what the German people had to do to recover from the Nazism that went right across their country. And I think that also should be a lesson for Israelis.
Mm. So as this progresses, unfortunately, it's going to progress. Would you come back on issues that matter and discuss from your perspective what's going on? Because people here don't fully grasp how dangerous the situation is.
I think you're right. Yes, of course, Cynthia, I'd love to come back and
Okay,
tell you more. Yeah.
okay. So I'll keep watching and listening to the news, and if you see something that needs to be talked about, send me a message and we'll do another show. So you've been listening. Sorry, Pippa. What your last name again, please?
Pippa Bartolotti. It's Italian.
And I'm Cynthia Pooler. This is Issues That Matter. And I've created a brand new website called Digital Cynthia. And it has all my videos on there in case anybody wants to look exactly what I have been doing. So, Pippa, thank you. And thank you, everybody, for listening. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you. That's my pleasure.